So today we are going to learn about data independence in Dbms. So this is a previous year question, as you can see here. Explain the concept of physical data independence and logical data with the typical real world example for each. For 4 marks this has been asked. So let's learn how can you answer this. Okay, so data independence means what? Data independence is nothing but it is the capacity to change the schema at one level of the, in 3 schema architecture. This would be our 3 schema architecture. In 3 schema architecture, you have to understand, you have the external level. Oh shit, guys, sorry for that. You have the okay, you have an external level, conceptual level, internal level, right? So this is how you know okay, this is how, what are the things which is there in the 3 schema architecture. You have the external view, you have the conceptual view, and then you have the internal schema. So it says that data independence means data independence is a capacity in which you can change one. Either you change the conceptual schema or internal schema without affecting the one which is. So there would be, what happened is that it will be without having to change the schema at the higher level. That means if I change internal schema, the conceptual schema would not change. Like, it's data independence. One schema changes doesn't affect the other schema. That is what it means by that. The one which is in the higher will be considered. So data independence is nothing but the capacity to change the schema at one level of a database system. So at one level of the database systems, you are changing the schema. So it's a capacity to change the schema at one level of the database system without having to change in the next schema, without having to change the schema which is present at the next higher level. So there are basically 2 types of data independence, that is logical data independence and physical data independence. So we have to learn for each what we mean by, because in our question mainly it is asked the physical data independence and logical data independence with example is mainly asked here. Okay, so if you see, logical data independence is the capacity to change the conceptual schema without having to change the external schema. So conceptual schema, if you think, we are changing here, we are changing the conceptual schema. Here we are changing the conceptual schema, but when you are changing the conceptual schema, the schema which is present above it is what? External schema. External schema, or it is called as the application schema. So what happens is that, what happens here is that whenever the conceptual schema is changing, there should be no change in the external schema or the application program. This is referring to the immunity, that is the external schema has an immunity to the changes which is made in the conceptual schema. You can see it like that also, right? That is, external schema has an immunity towards the changes in the conceptual schema. So when conceptual schema changes, there is no change in the external schema, or it is called as application program, is called as logical data independence. If you see this example, we may change the conceptual schema. If you see the conceptual schema, how you are changing is that by expanding the database, by adding a record type or data item. I am adding a record type or data item or reduce the database by removing a record or data item. So after the conceptual schema undergoes a logical recognition, application program that refers to the external schema must work as before. It should still work as before. That means this is my conceptual schema before. Now what happened is that we need, if we change this conceptual schema, like if I want to expand the database by adding a record, or if I'm reducing the database by removing, so here I had DOB. So what happened? After the conceptual schema undergoes this logical recognition, what happens is that the application programs that is referring to this external schema, this was our external schema before, it should work as how it was before itself. Right, it should work as how it was before when a conceptual schema undergoes a logical recognition, like just like if I'm expanding a database or if I'm reducing the database. Like expanding database means what? I am adding a database record here. So this is one of the real life example that you can basically write in here. Now physical data independence means, physical data independence is the capacity in which you are changing the internal schema without affecting the change in the conceptual schema. So it is like the immunity to the conceptual schema to changes in the internal schema. Example is that if you are creating additional access structures to improve a performance of retrieval or update, additional access structures the internal schema is like I am modifying an access structure or storage structure I am doing here to improve the performance of retrieval or update. So if the same data as before remains in the database, and we should not have to change the conceptual schema. The data would not change in the conceptual schema. The same data would be there in the conceptual schema. If I do an internal schema, I have said, okay, I am modifying the access structure or storage structure. Access structure means I am improving the performance of retrieval or update. If I am doing whatever it is, there should be no change in the conceptual schema. The data in the conceptual schema would remain the same. This is what physical data independence means. Logical data means changing in the conceptual schema doesn't affect in the external schema, and physical data independence means changes in the internal schema doesn't affect the conceptual schema. So how does internal schema get changed? By modifying an access structure or a storage structure. So this is the question. So yeah.